Let's take a look at the Wyatt.ERP technique. I call this the Wyatt.ERP technique because Wyatt.ERP is the person on augforums.com that I learned this technique from. His username is a clever play on the famous Wyatt.ERP lawman in the old American West. We can use the Wyatt.ERP technique whenever we need to combine unrelated data sets together. In this set of lessons, we are going to combine purchase order lines and sales order lines together. We'll make the quantities on purchase order lines positive, then make the quantities on the sales order lines negative. This will allow us to get a total quantity for each item across both purchase order lines and sales order lines to see if there is a net total supply, which would be positive, or a net total demand, which would be negative. Let's go to my finished product generic inquiry to see the end result of what we are going to build. We can see that we have 4 columns and the data for all 4 columns exists for both purchase order lines and sales order lines. We can see on this first page that we are looking at purchase order lines because there is a PO in front of the values in the order number column. Because these are purchase orders, the quantity column is positive. Normally, if you wanted to combine purchase order lines together with sales order lines, you would probably export this purchase order lines data to Excel, then go to another generic inquiry that has these same 4 columns, but for sales order lines, then export that sales order lines generic inquiry to Excel. Then you could copy and paste the data in Excel to put it together into one table. But wouldn't it be cool if we could do all of that work in one generic inquiry? This finished product generic inquiry has done just that. Let's go to the last page to see what I mean. Isn't this cool? On the last page, we see sales order lines data in the same generic inquiry. We know that because the values in the order number column begin with SO. Also, the quantity column is negative, not positive like it was for the purchase order lines. Because we have all of this in one generic inquiry, we can build a pivot table that gives us a net total quantity for each item across both purchase order lines and sales order lines. Let's click the Pivot tab to see that. Isn't this also pretty cool? We can see that there is a net total demand for AA computer because the total quantity is negative. And there is a net total supply for AA Lego because the total quantity of 2,280 is positive. We can also click on the total column to sort and quickly see the items that are the most negative. These are the items that are likely causing the biggest challenges in our supply chain. We can also click on the plus icon to expand an item and see how it's doing by warehouse. We can see here that the retail warehouse has a net total supply, it's positive, but the wholesale warehouse is driving the overall negative net total demand. Pretty cool, right? Now, before we look at how to build this example, I'd like to emphasize that the focus of this set of lessons, of which this is part 1, is on understanding the Wyatt.ERP technique. I'm starting off by just showing one example of how you can apply the Wyatt.ERP technique to a real-world situation using purchase order lines and sales order lines. Seeing this example is cool, but what's more powerful is fully understanding the core of the Wyatt.ERP technique, so you can put this technique on your tool belt and use it in other real-world situations. For simple tips and tricks, I like showing the end result first, like I just did, then walking through the tabs of the already built generic inquiry so you can build it on your own. But because the Wyatt.ERP technique is more involved, we're going to build this from scratch and look at the results throughout the process after we layer in each piece step by step, because I think this will be the best way to fully understand the technique. Now, originally, the Wyatt.ERP technique involved having to create an attribute and add possible combo box values to that attribute. That was a cumbersome step, and it also made it challenging to move the finished generic inquiry to another Acumatica environment because you had to recreate the attribute in the new environment. That's where Laura Jaffe, another awesome person on augforums.com, came up with a way to do the Wyatt.ERP technique without needing to create an attribute. To honor Laura's significant enhancement, I thought about renaming this to the Wyatt.ERP Laura Jaffe technique, but that name seemed too long. Okay, so let's get started with building this thing, and we'll start with the part that Laura Jaffe contributed by taking a look at the Wyatt.ERP technique, generic inquiry,